I'm sick and tired of amputating limbs, sick and tired of seeing all of the disease states that are walking around us in our community and affecting our livelihood and our children's and our grandchildren's future. And there's something we can do about it, which happens to be against most of the disinformation which I see has been promulgated by the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry on us for 100 years.
You're listening to the Family Health Lab. Healthy parents, healthy kids.
Dr. Gary Fettke, I'm very, very honoured to have you on my podcast. Thanks, Gary.
Look, Claire, I'm honoured to be on it. I've actually worked out the secret to feeling infinitely better in life.
I want that. What's that?
I've taken the mirror down in the bathroom. This works brilliantly. There's nothing to look at.
That leads me to say, and I know you weren't fishing, but you're looking really, really well, which is brilliant, which kind of is a testimony to your own health and healthy lifestyle and your food, your nutrition and your good habits. But yeah, just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you. Ditto. To put it in perspective, Belinda and I have our 41-year wedding anniversary next week. So,
oh, congratulations. And I know family means a lot to you. You're doing something.
Huge. And we're going to be at her goddaughter's wedding for our wedding anniversary. So we get to celebrate it. And as it turns out, Belinda said this morning, how about we go and have breakfast at the place where we had our reception? But can we bring two? So we're going to bring our daughters along for our wedding anniversary at another wedding. So it's all complicated, but it is, it's pretty cool.
Complicated in a great way. That's the way that, to bringing your family along.
I love going to weddings. I love them. I just go along, and I actually see it as a celebration of our own vows. And I know that sounds corny and whatever, but I realise weddings are about the bride and groom on the day, but it's a me world. So I like to take my thing.
Bringing this conversation to the me world, then I'd like to know about your life, your career, and just get into all of these really, really deep topics and why you became very, very interested, and then a researcher and also a huge health advocate. But I just wanted to start off with your career as a surgeon and what that looked like. What bits were you chopping into? What does a day in a life of a surgeon look like?
I gave a talk about a year ago in our local museum, actually, about it's interesting characters of Tasmania, and I was asked to speak, but it was actually not about what I do or what I've done. It was about why I've done it. I found it really challenging. It's online somewhere. It's probably been seen by a couple of hundred people. It's nothing huge, but I found it really challenging. I didn't give away everything about me because but so rather than me being just a surgeon, it goes back, and I've got to go back in my own family. And it's only in the last less than 10 years I found out my own family history. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as it turns out. And my grandmother was the 8th of 9 children in a very wealthy family in Germany, and they owned the hops industry for Northern Europe. They're very wealthy, but Jewish. And to be fair, I didn't know I was Jewish until I was 20, because my mum died when I was a kid. But nonetheless, that's another story. And I've got so many religious surroundings, I've got an adopted sister, a stepsister, a half sister, a couple of sisters-in-law. I think they're all different religions, just to give you perspective. So I'm deeply spiritual, but not at all religious. Anyway, my grandmother, before the Second World War, was standing up on beer halls denouncing the Nazis. And in the Nazi museum is a video of a Gestapo agent saying he only respected 4 Jews in his life, and one of them was my grandmother. I didn't know all of this until 5 years ago. So she was very outspoken, escaped to South America through the war. My mother grew up in Chile and then Bolivia. And at the end of the war, the family went back my mother didn't, she stayed in South America, but the family went back. And my grandmother set up 8 orphanages in Nuremberg and Bavaria. We're talking 1940s, what a disaster and all that sort of thing. And so she is the matriarch of social work, and I did not know any of this. But when my uncle introduced me to it, he actually showed me in the Nazi museum there a picture of the ugly Jewish children. And there was a picture of my mother as about an 8-year-old as an ugly Jewish child. Like, it wasn't a good picture of her, but nonetheless, she was used in Nazi propaganda to say this is what ugly Jews look like. And there's a picture of my mother. As it turned out, in Chile, she had won a beauty contest. So imagery is how you take the picture and how you look and how you be perceived and all. But nonetheless, I didn't know any of this history. There's a whole lot of other stuff I didn't know. But my mother was very outspoken about human rights. I grew up in a household where she ran language classes because she arrived in Australia speaking German, Spanish, French, Portuguese, but not any English. But so she actually ran language classes for immigrants in our lounge room. And to be really scarred about the whole process, she would have at Tupperware parties, she would have me singing Edelweiss in a pair of lederhosen when I was about 5 or 6. And I am tone deaf now, and I don't think I was any better back then.
What a
So
visual.
my mother was quite outspoken, politically active. And so I was raised in a questioning environment, and not realizing that I had a questioning background in the family. So that was the way I was raised. She died when I was a teenager through the medical mishap. And so therefore I've had this chip, I suppose, a chip on my shoulder that the medical establishment can do better. Even when I was a medical student. And Belinda has had an amputated finger because of a medical negligence. And and I ended up working for that guy when I was a trainee. And I was covering for him when I was a trainee. And people said, how can you work for him? And Belinda said, it was a complicated time. And unfortunately, I don't have as much respect for the medical profession as I think society has for the medical profession. So I've always been questioning. I was the questioning student at university. I was the questioning intern resident registrar. So I've been somewhat successful to actually still get through that system despite being a pain in the ass. And I get it, but as you know, on the bottom of my emails, and I stand by this, science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. That is the scientific method. That is the way we all learn. And I'm not so, we don't all have to have the same opinion. And I'm interested that you have an opinion, but if it's different from mine, I'm not interested in your opinion. I'm interested in how you got to that opinion. And that's, I think, a really important fact for moving forward for all of us, including myself, to work out if we have differences of opinion, how did you get there? Because there's so much variation of information, misinformation, disinformation. I've been labelled as the number one misinfluencer outside of the US and Europe. Recently by that document that went to the World Health, went to the United Nations, and we can track it all back to World Economic Forum and influences and
What
the
a
whole
compliment.
anti-meat rhetoric. It's nice to be targeted by the corporates. But to be fair, I am, according to the corporate world, someone you don't want to listen to. So if anybody listening into this right now, turn off if you actually want to believe what the corporates want you to believe. So anyway, so the whole thing is, that's been my upbringing. And I know it's a long-winded answer, but I ended up travelling the path of surgery and particularly orthopedics. And that's because I broke 9 bones as a kid. Only 7 were mine, though. Only 7 were mine. I broke a couple. I broke my best mate's foot, broke someone else's jaw, but that was with a cricket ball, not with a fist. And my mum died when I was a teenager. I was really angry. Sport saved me because lots of other people I know went down the drug line. Linda and I went to a fairly tough old school in Sydney. It was the home of the drug centre of the northern suburbs of Sydney. So that was the upbringing, and you had to stand up for yourself in that. So I can be bullied and all that sort of thing, and I have been, but you stand up for yourself, you stand up for what you think is right, and you question information. So then I ended up doing orthopedic surgery because I had an interest in science, had an interest in sport, had an interest in doing something about it. That ended up being that pathway. Had a successful career. Well, I thought it was successful for 35 years. And in the path for the last 20 years of it, at least, I would have been looking after most of the diabetic foot complications in northern Tasmania and a lot of the deep infections in joint replacement. So I was Mr. Pus. There wouldn't be an operating list where I didn't find pus. And it's messy. It's messy for the people. It's a horrible situation. And then when you start realizing, okay, and so I have a lot of patients that were difficult, troublesome ones that needed a lot of work. And I was having a chat yesterday to a veterinary surgeon who came around here and who's right in the regenerative agriculture world. So we ended up having this great lunch. And so, but we're talking about surgery, and we both ended up, whether or not as humans or animals, the most interesting stuff is the stuff that nobody else wants to do. So that ended up being my practice, specialising in everything that nobody else wanted to do. Part of that is you then have to say, okay, this is what I can do as a surgeon, but this is what I want you to do as a patient to improve your health outcome. And this is what I want the system to support in the process. And ultimately, in all of health and medicine and life and well-being, if you put the right fuel in the vehicle, you are more likely to have the vehicle running well. If you put the wrong fuel in the vehicle, then it doesn't matter how much time you spend servicing the vehicle, washing the car, checking the tire pressure, checking the oil. It just doesn't matter if you're putting the wrong fuel in. And that's the basics of nutrition. And as it turns out, my diabetic patients were being given ice cream in hospitals, and I'm ranting and raving about this not being, right? And they said, well, if you've got a problem with it, Dr. Fettke, you need to change the guidelines. Well, it's taken 15 years, but we've done it. And that's been part of a lot of advocacy work. And maybe I should just quit now at this point in time, but I don't think we've finished. And in the process of all of this, I came to realize that my surgery was one hat that I wore, but my patient's metabolic health was probably more important. And through the role of social media and YouTube and podcasts and guideline reform, I recognize that I now reach more people every day through those platforms than I will see in an entire lifetime of medicine. A very powerful number. So that makes me a misinfluencer, okay, if I'm giving the wrong advice. And I don't think I am, I'm saying that you want to fuel your bodies, and you need to do that by having a complete set of essential proteins, a complete set of essential fats, and a complete set of micronutrients, a complete set of vitamins, and a complete set of minerals. Very carefully realise that I have not said that there is a single essential carbohydrate. And that's it. And so the stuff I talk about is biochemistry, or practical and functional biochemistry, because as it turns out, there's not a single biochemical pathway in the body that requires us to ingest glucose or fructose or carbohydrate. Not one, zero. We utilize them when they come in, but we don't need them. And when you realize that carbohydrates are only available seasonally, so fruit's only available at the end of summer, beginning of autumn, honey is available in that same time frame, but then you've got to go along and climb a tree and beehive and rape and pillage the beehive and take away their food supply for the winter. And the other small amount is, small amounts in glycogen in animal-based product. The carbohydrates, and God with a little g, because I've written a book about philosophy that some time ago, God wasn't stupid enough to make us dependent on a seasonal food source. God was made spiritually to have us source our food 365 days of the year. And the only food source which is available 365 days of the year is other animals. Recognizing we have the metabolism of an animal, and so is every other animal. And that means that it's an animal-based diet that is the most evolutionary appropriate diet, arguably the whole ability for us to get access to that fat and those nutrients by actually eating other animals. And our whole human development, our brain development all followed suit. So it is our evolutionary diet. It is as Ken Berry, who I know you had last time, calls it, the proper human diet. So, whether or not you call it the proper human diet, the ancestral diet, it's definitely not the planetary diet, which is being pushed out at the moment by the corporates, when that's the plant-based one, which has just come out recently, with an enormous amount of corporate sponsorship when you go delving into it. The food industry puts a rubber stamp on something, then I wouldn't trust the rubber stamp.
Your wife, Belinda Fettke, is just an amazing independent researcher. She's looking into those issues, those corporate the influences behind these strategies, and not just strategies, but our food policies, our guidelines, and medical schools even influenced. But I'd like to come to that. But I'm just thinking of going back to you working with your patients and discovering that you're chopping parts off of those patients, and that's your profession at that time. But you wanted to get into prevention, which was unusual.
Prevention flowed on from the intervention. So in hospital, I said, I want you to stop giving them ice cream. I had to prescribe on the medical chart that I wanted to have a boiled egg twice a day. I had to prescribe that they have cheese twice a day. I had to prescribe full fat yogurt. I said, all I want, and you can still do it with hospital food now, it hasn't improved.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say to dietitians, okay, show me the protein at breakfast. Where is the protein? Number one thing you need in recovering from surgery or health or problems is protein. So let's say the person needs 100 grams of protein. They need more than that. Okay, they're going to have milk in the morning. Okay, that's going to give what? 3 grams? Okay, where's the rest? Oh, it's in the fruit and the jelly. No, I said it's not. It's just not there. Okay, then we come to the main meal of the day. Where's the protein? Oh, there's a bit there. So I'd measure it out. Oh, okay, there's another 10 grams. Okay, we've still got 190 to go, people. Where's the rest of it coming? And, when you realise there's chocolate chip biscuits, ice cream, fruit juice, cake being delivered for morning tea, afternoon tea, comes with the meals, and then there's a supper as well. And the tea ladies, bless their souls, coming around with the fruit juices and the sugar and then you go down to the hospital kiosk and they're serving red light for the traffic light system, which I don't agree with, but nonetheless, 90% of the stuff in the kiosk is actually red light.
Crazy.
And under occupational health and safety standards, by law, it's not allowed to be there. So I get into trouble by reporting hospital auxiliary to the medical. It's just bureaucracy. I'd say, well, I've been nice about it. I said, I really think the food here is crap. I got reported to the medical board for a slide I used once, hospital food is crap and it's killing my patients. And I used that slide in a presentation, the second slide I gave to the hospital food industry at their national meeting. I was an invited speaker. And then APRA, in their wisdom, decided to investigate through the hospital how many of my patients actually died from hospital food. And I said, it's a figure of speech. You can put in whatever expletive you want before it. To the point that I had patients who were adopting this low-carb lifestyle with their diabetes out of control. And so when they were at home, they did not have diabetes, but when they were in hospital, they did.
And that's still happening. Family member recently in hospital, and we were talking to them about sporting that their blood sugars were in control for years. And in hospital, they were introduced onto insulin, and then the dose was increased twice, and it was purely because of what they were being fed. And when I spoke to the hospital, they were like, "Well, we cannot follow a sugar-free diet; it's too complicated. We can follow vegan or halal if you've got special dietary requirements,
that's where the hospitals are now negligent. This is all the work that we've done. And I know we're zipping down, 15 years of hard work into the advocacy role.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last few years, therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, or low carb, is now in the National Diabetes Strategy. And the Australian Diabetes Society, which is the peak organisation for all endocrinologists in the country, has it as a best practice guideline. And Diabetes Australia has it as a best practice guideline. Wow, we're the first country in the world to do that. And I'm very happy to be part of the crew that's been able to get that across the line. So it hasn't just been me, but it's been fingers and planting seeds and watering them and using sledgehammers. And it's been, good guy, bad guy. I'm mostly the bad guy in that game. So James Mookie and Peter Brookner are definitely nice people. You know them both, and they're good guys, and they come in and try and mop up the mess that I've made.
We need the sledgehammer too.
Yeah, no, I get it. The pioneers take the arrow and the settlers take the land is the old adage. But we've done it, and so therefore, if the hospital is not providing that to people who wish to do it, I've never forced anyone to eat it, to eat one way, despite what medical boards said at some point. Oh, you forced someone to do it. So find the proof that I've ever forced anyone to do anything. Oh, you took away one of the residents' bananas at some point in time. I said, yes, I did. And I gave it back to them with a writing on it of how many teaspoons of sugar in it. That's not me taking the food away and stopping them from eating. I can still remember it very clearly because bananas have got more sugar in them than Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is about 10% sugar. Bananas are 16 to 24%, depending on the ripeness. Okay, so I just wrote on it 16 to 24% sugar. But I gave it back. So that's not stealing anyone's food and not letting them eat. That was an educational moment. So yeah, I'm guilty of that crime of taking away someone's food, but I gave it back to them 1 minute later. So if you wish to choose this option, this is what our basic premise is about. A, you should be told that diabetes is a reversible condition. If you go back to it, so my definition of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or in fact all diabetes, is the inability of the body to manage the glucose load that's presented to it. That's it. And all the medications that are used in type 1, type 2 diabetes are to generally manage that load that the body is presented with. So if you don't have the carbohydrate glucose load, you don't need the vast majority of those medications. Maybe some secondary effects which come into the equation, but you can see a dramatic reduction in the requirement of the medication. And most of the medications have side effects. Number one medication, insulin, or the one that most popular, the moment you put people on insulin, they put on weight because insulin's a fat storage hormone. It's got other inflammatory processes and it's a cancer promoting hormone, but it's none of this. It's not a nice hormone. Our body does. This is my COVID research project. Flipped it. I actually said, if we're going to demonize carbohydrates, I did a whole lot of research to work out what is the toxic dose of carbohydrate. It's just an academic argument if we look at the biochemistry. And I came up with the figure of 4 grams. So 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1/5 of a slice of bread has a negative effect on the body. Now, that may seem a bit dramatic, but then through an hour talk or whatever, I think I've justified it. And that's been seen, I don't know, 500,000 times or something. I can't find any major criticism of it because it's just biochemistry. This is the effect of our body on having something which is seasonally available. And our body's got all sorts of ways of storing fat because we're an animal. So when the seasonally available carbohydrate comes around, we eat it and we store it as fat for winter hibernation. That's what animals do in the wild, and that's what we do as humans. The only trouble is we've made it available 365 days a year. Highly addictive and drives behavior, and that's the biochemistry of it. I'm not making this stuff up. Just come back to chemistry. What happens inside the cell is biochemistry. It is actually science. What happens outside of the body is non-science. It's driven by profits, power, religious ideology. It's not science, and that's really what we've been coming up against. And then if you call it not science, then that's misinformation. And it's not. It's just these are the things, and people can make up their mind once they find out the facts.
Once they're given information, like you say, not everybody has to choose a low carb approach or any particular dietary approach, but giving people the information. And for those who don't know your full story, it's quite the journey that you have been on, and your wife, and your family as well. So as a surgeon practicing and wanting better for his patients, discovering that they were being fed ice cream daily, desserts and sugars, you wanted better for them so that they recovered better, had better health outcomes, but potentially some of them may not need surgery. if they change their lifestyle. So how, it's a loaded question, but how supportive was the hospital, the dietitians, the bodies around you supporting you? And what
Do you
was
want me to
the
say zero, or do you want me to use expletives?
and
Whatever
what
the
was
ones that...
and also what was the personal cost of going the direction that you ultimately did go in?
One of the good things about surgeons, and there aren't many, but is that is it what my assistant came up with we were talking about collective nouns. You've got a gaggle of geese or a herd of cows or all that sort. So we're trying to come up with the collective noun of surgeons. But Steve came up with it. It was just brilliant. He said, "Oh, it's an ego of surgeons." Because, and I went, and we just went, "Oh, lay down, Mazaire, you win. Okay, that's the best collective noun." So, and I'm okay with that, because to actually do surgery, you need to back yourself. It's just you, your team, your instruments, in the moment. I've got no time to go off and have tea breaks or coffee breaks or shut down the system and we'll be back tomorrow. Even though I've done some operations which have gone for more than a day, you do need to have a wee break in there. And I'm not talking about little, I'm talking about a wee break. So you do need to back yourself. So when you think you're right, then you do what you think is right. And so this, to me, became a no-brainer situation. I put a glucose monitor on someone, you feed them carbohydrates, and if they've got diabetes or pre-diabetes, their blood glucose goes up. If you don't feed them carbohydrate, blood glucose stays stable. The majority of, a significant number of complications in surgery are related to perioperative blood glucose control. So if you've got a tight glucose control, you get less infections. Okay, let's actually give tight glucose control. So to me, this is a no-brainer. It's practical. I can prove it over and over and over again. And if I'm being told I'm wrong by the administration, I'm being told by the dietitians I'm wrong, I'm told by, well, and as it turned out, the cereal industry thought I was wrong, and the pharmaceutical industry thought I'd been wrong. So I ultimately ended up being targeted. But you know me, if I think I'm right, I'm right. I'm not going to back down. So that stubbornness, throw in my family history of standing up against this, which I didn't know about at the time, but nonetheless, that's just what you do. And so Belinda came along for the ride. She's a gorgeous woman, and she was going, "You're going blue in the face," talking about this. Tim Noakes, who's a good mate over in South Africa, "You guys are going blue in the face defending the position." So she started delving into it. As it turns out, the head of the dietitians board here in Australia, who was writing letters of complaint to the CEO of the hospital, so union pressure against the hospital to silence me. And we've got all the documents. I'm not making this stuff up. She was really good friends with the same head of the dietitians board in South Africa who was going after Tim Noakes, who was also friends with the same head of the dietitians board in Sweden who was going after Annika Dahlqvist. This is Belinda's work. Oh, I hear that all arms around each other, best buddies. You can track them down. And they were using the same playbook in Sweden and South Africa and Australia against doctors. And we're not celebrities. We're not, and they were not influencers in the media or anything else. We're just doctors who are sick and tired of the complications that we're seeing around us. And the dietitians boards of the world, which have all their corporate influences upon them, were using the same playbook in 3 countries at the same time to bring us all down. But we were all right. And the trouble, one of the great things, Rod Taylor, I can't even remember the year now, 2012, 2013, something like that, invited me to come across, have a chat in his lounge room. Myself, Simon Thornley, Ron Rabb, and Ken Sakaris gave 20, 30-minute presentations in Rod Taylor's lounge room. Still remember it. I found my tribe. And around that time, Low Carb Down Under was born, and the amount of work that Rod's done, an absolute giant here in the background of elevating the whole concept. And so Rod's work is, but to find that I wasn't alone calling this out has been really important. And to find now other doctors, other healthcare professionals, good people calling it out, just going, because it's not hard. As I keep saying, if an orthopedic surgeon can understand the biochemistry, it's not hard. We're known as the apes dragging our knuckles along the ground, because it's for our brute strength in theatre. I always just think it's controlled strength, but nonetheless, we are hammering things and putting rods down and plates and screws and hip and knee replacements. But I also did microsurgery. I'm not a complete heathen. But all of this was a no-brainer. But it was just extremely sad to see the system, my own hospital, and I'm presenting medical grand rounds with this information. My medical colleagues were interested in the topic and in corridor conversations were very supportive of me. However, not publicly, because when APRA comes after you and when this becomes headline news in your local community and I'm being interrogated in the press and publicly, and we weren't quite, it's because we were in the public arena that I was targeted. If I was quietly going about this, it'd be fine, but I was targeted within 24 hours of going on this thing called social media by someone who was working with Coca-Cola at the time. Within 24 hours. Now, I'm just, I'm in the backwater of the world in this place called Launceston in Tasmania. It's not as though I've got some high New York profile or whatever, but it obviously had resonance because here's a surgeon who's sick and tired of amputating limbs because of the way they're eating. And as it turns out, social media was my downfall, but it was also a rallying cry for myself, others, and to actually win this long-standing battle. I got reported to the medical board on 3 occasions. Each time we tracked it back to dietitians. One of them, I was reported for inappropriately reversing someone's type 2 diabetes on national TV. We can't do that. You're not allowed to be involved in that. And people think I'm making this stuff up, but I actually get a degree of PTSD going through the thousands of pages. You can't sit behind it. We had a table tennis table, literally the war room in here. Just all the paperwork going through piles and piles of it, research papers, boxes of research papers here, just defending the topic. So I've done a PhD in the biochemistry. I haven't, but the amount of work that's gone involved into this, and I didn't think that I'd be in this. I just wanted to stop chopping limbs off and giving my patients some protein. But as a result of having to defend this turf, it's been really, really interesting. And virtually everything in nutrition is a house of cards. You poke it, falls over. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Well, that was written by the breakfast cereal industry. And the cereal industry, we're supposed to eat cereal to stop us all from masturbating. That's it. I mean, what a ridiculous thing that the whole food pyramid, the base of the food pyramid, you might say I'm drawing a long bow, but the base of the food pyramid, our dependence on cereals and grains, was based on this whole Adventist involvement in our food dietary guidelines going back to John Harvey Kellogg, who invented breakfast cereal, and our dependence on carbohydrates so we could all stop masturbating. I'm very happy for it all to be fact-checked. I always encourage people, just Google cereal and masturbation into your phone. You can use whatever search engine you want. The name John Harvey Kellogg will come up straight away. That's it. That is the history of our food pyramid. It goes back to a ridiculous. And then, as I don't know if you heard me say, but I say if you're going to eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid. Along the way, you're going to look like it.
No, not heard you say that. That's a good one.
Walk down the street, everyone's triangular shaped now.
Yeah.
Well, no, okay, sorry, it's not everyone. That's an exaggeration. I accept that. But, a significant number of the population have the pear-shaped habitus. Everyone's become triangular.
While following the guidance that they're being given, eating those healthy star rating foods and eating those cereals for breakfast every day, low fat for many decades.
Star rating, algorithm for that, was written by Sanitarium. One of the people who was working for Sanitarium, Greg Gamble, who's recently been given some Order of Australia, not quite, I can't remember one of those Orders of Australia that get given out, for his services. So I'm going, hang on, you've written the Health Star rating, which suits the processed food industry. Here's a little interesting thing about the Health Star rating, because Sanitarium is owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is a vegan promoting corporate church. thing, and everyone goes, "Oh, they're not that influential," but they're the second biggest educator in the world after the Catholic Church. They've started and owned most of the cereal industry directly or indirectly. They started the alternate meat industry. They started the Western soy industry, the infant food soy industry, stevia industry. They're involved in 2,000 food products, vertically integrated into health and hospitals, particularly in the US. Here in Australia, it's Avondale College, Sanitarium Hospital in Sydney, and Sanitarium, and lifestyle medicine. They all started these institutions, despite what they may deny. This is another whole topic of discussion. So the star rating isn't it's against what they do is they have their food groups, and then they develop a star rating against other products in the food group. So therefore, let's say Up and Go, which is at 4.5 or 5 stars. I don't know where it is. I know it's it's nearly out of the universe and how good it is for us. It's full of sugar and carbs and chemicals and seed oil. It's just crap. Australian colloquialism, slang, not a vulgarism. Okay, but I don't know what they marked it up against. But that's like getting a drink which is made just up with sugar and oil and comparing it. So yes, it is 4.5 stars better than that, but all the health star rating stuff is comparative against other products. So you could be a company like Sanitarium, and I've got no proof that they've done it, but in theory they could do a short run of product, brand name X, and then put that in for a health star rating, and that's clearly garbage. So that gets a health star rating of 0. So anything against it is then rated up the screen. So it's not a health star rating. But the trouble is, nearly half the population is functionally illiterate. And in Tasmanian figures, it's 48% of men and 46% of women are functionally illiterate. Now, there's data to support that, and you can extrapolate that across Australia. I know I've presented that to a Senate inquiry on food labelling, and so it was all completely referenced. But the take-home message of that is that nearly half the people in the population can't actually read a food label. So they can only determine what the food is by the picture on it. So the presentation was in relationship to food labelling, particularly calling the plant-based meats, plant-based foods that are saying it's a plant-based burger, or it's plant-based chicken, or it's plant-based pork. And on those packages, they actually had a picture of a cow or a picture of a chicken and so that is, to me, even though they had plant-based chicken on it, the fact that there's a chicken on there, for the people who are functionally illiterate, nearly half the population, that is chicken until proven otherwise, because they can't read the other stuff. That's scary statistics, but they're Australian-wide statistics. Again, please go and fact-check me on this stuff. It's published. So as a result of that, Belinda and I presented to one of their Senate inquiries on food labelling, and they changed the law around it. It's being challenged again now. So it's now illegal under Australian law to actually put a picture of a chicken on a plant-based food that promoting itself as plant-based chicken. And so when people say, I can't do much, this is, again, well, Belinda and I are just a couple of, state school educated kids who have actually just gone along and put together the work and actually put together the Senate submissions. And there's things you can do. But unless you do it, then things aren't going to happen.
The changes that you mentioned earlier, the diabetes handbook, those position statements, that has been influenced by yourself and a number of others, a handful of others, really, pushing and
it's not a big team.
No, it's a small team, and the time, the effort, the passion, and the consistency. Now I understand your background, Gary. That does make more sense.
That was my background.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It kind of brings it back full circle. But I want to ask you about what people can do. Perhaps they're not ready to step into advocacy or science research or something like that. But at the beginning of our chat, before we hit record, you mentioned your family and what you've got planned for the rest of the day. And I don't think I've ever had a conversation with you where you haven't mentioned family. So important. So what can people bringing up children or they've got grandchildren? How can we support our families, for instance?
They're very there's so many different ways to go down. Look, the very first thing is you lead by example. And a lot of people say, oh, my obesity or my health problems are genetic. Well, no, it's not genetic. It's just that the way you eat is the way your parents ate and the parents before them. And we've now had enough generations of people involved since the introduction of margarine that we've now got at least two, but probably three generations of families that have been surrounded by poor quality food. And that's reflected in the consumer price index. If you actually look at the barrel of goods involved in the consumer price index, and you can go onto the Australian Bureau of Statistics and see what their composite group of goods is, you can also go back 10 years and see that it's a different group of goods. And you go back 20 and 30 and 40 years. So 30, 40 years ago, there was no allocation towards takeaway food or eating out. Well, now it's 15, I don't know, it's 15, 20% of the allocation of the consumer price index is related to quality of to eating out. And they've taken the high quality nutritional foods out of it, so particularly the animal based products, and that's been reduced as a part of the consumer price index, and the ultra processed foods have been increased in that. So we've actually there's a book that discusses this called fiat food, as distinct from fiat currency, but fiat food. And I fact checked something in that. We've had demonisation of eggs that actually came about in 1969, related to the consumer price index. It's got nothing to do with health. So Lyndon B. Johnson at that point in time was faced by a consumer price index inflationary number, and he'd already reduced the amount of good quality meats and animal-based foods. And he was looking at another way of trimming that figure because there happened to be an egg shortage that year. So he brought in the head of the egg board. Apparently the discussion went along the lines of, you've got to bring down the price of eggs. I can't afford this. And then the guy from the egg board said, we can't do it. There's a shortage of eggs and chicken, whatever mystery was going on at the time. So he said, we can't bring it down. So Lyndon B. Johnson got in, the Surgeon General said, I need you to demonise eggs so the population stop eating them. And that's when the whole egg, cholesterol, heart disease thing started. And eggs are the most magnificent food. I always describe them. A fertilised egg, chicken egg, will produce a living creature with a similar metabolism to us in perfect proportions with no wastage. There's nothing in there which is not involved in life and in the perfect proportions. So how on earth can it cause heart disease? And again, it just doesn't. And there are some people I've heard of who are eating 20 eggs a day. It's not me, but I'm just saying they've been doing that for years. That's not really up my alley, but nonetheless. So coming back to the fact, we've been surrounded by poor quality food now for decades. And in a busier world and financial stresses and people taking on 2 jobs or 3 jobs or both parents working, all of a sudden things become fast and you need something to be. I get the whole idea of convenience. We've been through that ourselves. We've gotten it wrong. We've already apologised to our children. Sorry, guys, we got that wrong at certain times in your life. Well-intentioned, but excuse me. Leading by example. So if 90% of people did 90% of what I'm talking about, we're all going to be 90% better. I'm not saying everyone has to do everything. We just need to improve things a bit. So if you start getting rid of ultra-processed foods, you start looking at your pantry and you actually see all the stuff in cardboard boxes, which has got a long shelf life. It's got a long shelf life because it's high in sugar, high in carbs, high in preservatives. If you're going to grate cheese, grate it. Don't actually get grated cheese. It's got a anti-caking agent on the stuff, which has got grated cheese. You don't want to put that in your body because it's a more processed environment with more chemicals in it. Go and get cheese and grate it. Eating a low-carb way, I call it low-carb healthy fat. If you want to go a bit further, it's called keto. If you want to go further down the path, it's called carnivore. And people cycle in and out of that. And people have bad days where they go back and eat some. We come up to Christmas. I'm more interested in what people eat between New Year and Christmas than they are between Christmas and New Year. And that's I'm not condoning stuff, but it's what you do most of the time. And reducing the amount of ultra-processed food, number one. Then reducing the sugar, carbs, and seed oils in your diet will have a benefit. And you'll notice that yourself. And then you introduce that conversation to the family, and then ultimately the family will come along. There's an enormous amount of work in the dementia space with the elderly. And I'm not speaking too far out. My mother-in-law has really struggled with a whole lot of things. And for the last 15 years, she has reduced her sugar and carbohydrate dramatically to the point that she was able to maintain her independence with an improvement across a wide range of situations and conditions. Now, she wasn't perfect, but she improved her situation dramatically, so she was able to maintain independence by herself. But sometimes, when particularly elderly, if they come into your house or you're caring for them, then it doesn't matter how cranky. If you don't buy the sugar and you don't buy the carbs and you don't buy all the processed foods, and there's good studies on therapeutic carbohydrates or low carb in the management of dementia, neurodegenerative conditions, Parkinson's disease, even motor neuron disease, and all the mental health disorders, and what was the other? And multiple sclerosis. It's worth the trial putting the right fuel in the body, or at least not putting the bad fuel in. So you've got control of their food. Why not try it? Because it doesn't cost anything to change food. And the same thing goes with your children. Your kids are not going out there and buying the food. You're buying the food. Sure, our children would, never, I don't think any of them are angels. Some are more angelic than others. But, parents can put up with a tantrum or two, if the food's not there, they won't eat it. And it's just, again, so many anecdotal stories around children's behaviour, ADHD, around food, sugar, food colorings, ultra-processed foods. Reduce those. Now, we've got 2 grandchildren who are really cool little dudes. They've been low-carb keto babies, through the pregnancies. I think they're extraordinary, but then I'm just a grandfather. Our granddaughter, she is a sugar addict. You let her near sugar and she'll go for it. And we're wired in nature to be sugar addicts. That's our survival instinct. She's learned to stop arguing. She knows it's not going to happen. She still asks for it, but it's not available. It's just, if it's not in her environment, she can't have it. But again, in nature, we are meant to source out sugar for our survival. And that behaviour is present in humans because you look at Christmas Eve at the shops. The shopping frenzy, because people are going to have no availability of that food tomorrow for one day of the year. And, we've all gone shopping out on Christmas Eve, and it's just total madness. Stocking because we're not going to be able to get access to food for 24 hours. It's complete nonsense. I'll say sugar drives behaviour. If you take the sugar out of the environment, the behaviour improves at a personal level, at a family level, and at a community level. And if you go back historically, like look at Weston A. Price's work from nearly 100 years ago as a dentist. And he went around communities, native communities that were considered primitive, but they had beautiful teeth, well-constructed jaws, healthy people, and generally living reasonably peacefully. I'm not saying there's never been wars and there's never been infighting and there's never I'm not saying there's hasn't been issues, but on the whole, they were healthier than we are now. And it's just interesting. I mean, the further, to quote one of Winston Churchill's lines, which Belinda pointed me to, and so I'll say it's from Winston Churchill via Belinda. The further you look back in time, the further you can look forward. And so everything we're talking about is there in time, in history, if you go back and looking at it. And I gave a talk a few years ago. I was asked to talk about something different. So I gave a talk on where's the best spot to hide something. Do you know the answer to that?
No,
you do, because I promise you. So I only ever
the last place you look.
Well, yeah, sort of, but I never ask a question that people don't know the answer to. Again, it's a philosophical thing, but my students, they'd say, I don't know. I said, I promise you do know. You just haven't worked it out yet. So the best place to hide something is in plain sight. So when you actually go and observe things and look at it and think about it, like, oh, that was hidden. That's obvious. It was there all the time. I just didn't see it with that perspective. So that's why I think everyone should be asking questions. What comes out of your doctor's mouth or your healthcare professional, just ask them a question. Which comes back to the grandchildren, because you said I got the 5 and 8-year-old have both had school reports which suggest that they do some questioning of their teachers. And the 5-year-old recently, I picked her up and she said, I had a time out today. I'm called Oompa. I have to Oompa Loompa from the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is hilarious. Anyway, I'm called Oompa. I had a time out. And I said, why did you have a time out, darling? She went, I was rolling my eyes at the teacher. She may come across this years down the track with this video. And I went, yes, I wasn't, not that I'm trying to undermine the teacher, but she's questioning.
Important. Yeah.
Anyway, then our daughter, because daughters know how to bring their fathers into line, said, Dad, I understand that you're teaching the kids to question. I teach them card tricks because I wanted them to try and work out what the trick is. There's something going on here, but they have to work it out. So, I'm teaching them card tricks, and it's good fun. We do science experiments. It's just getting them to question, think what's going on around them. Anyway, our daughter said, look, Dad, I understand that you're teaching them to question authority, but remember, I'm the authority in the house. I said, okay, all right, fine, I'll take that on board. So I sat them down. I said, okay, it's really important that you question authority, but your mother is the authority in the house. So you have to do exactly what Mum says. But you are allowed to question your father.
Good. I like that.
And I've had that story around the family table. And do you know what our eldest daughter did? She rolled her eyes at me.
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? They're learning.
Look, we're not perfect. We're imperfect on so many different fronts, but we try. And if you go to bed and you say, well, I've tried, and you go to bed and you've learnt something that day, which is something my father taught me, never go to bed unless you've learnt something. He didn't finish high school. There was a situation when he was growing up, but when he met my mother, she taught him to read the dictionary. So my father would not go to bed until he learnt a new word every night.
Beautiful.
And so that was the way I was brought up. Okay, what have you learnt today? That was a conversation. What did you learn today? And the other thing is, a frugal allowance was given. I only got that allowance if I told my father a filthy joke. So
it sounds very random.
That
explains the other side of you.
I don't know. Well, I don't know how many sides I have. Okay.
Thank you for talking through how people can get started on this themselves, which is modelling and cutting things out. I often say to add these things in, sugar-free foods and real foods, whole foods, is better. Crowd out the other foods, so you're not being drawn to them. So if there's something you love that's a real food, maybe it's a bit of steak, maybe it's a particular type of chicken or particular egg dish, fish, then crowd out that other stuff with all the good stuff.
We have Meatball Mondays here.
Oh, nice.
They talk about meatless Mondays. I hope we have Meatball Mondays, and they generally last till Thursday. Right. So essentially, that's another thing. I mean, meatball mince, buy the cheapest. That's the best one. It's full of fat and it's full of other bits of gristle and grime and whatever. I actually have the cheap meat. It's full of fat. Doesn't need to be cooked in anything. And that's a snack food for the week. It's in the fridge. Oh, a bit peckish. Cheese, meatball. Cheese, meatball. Cheese is 22% protein, 25% protein, and meat's in sort of similar vicinity. We really struggle to get as much protein as we should into our bodies. Complete protein.
What does your eating pattern look like?
I just know that whatever is around me is low carb. And so once you actually get rid of sugar and ultra-processed food and things that drive behaviour out of your body, you will go, I need protein. I need energy or fat. I need some micronutrient. I need salt. So like my body will tell me. So it happens to be and to quote Karen Zinn from years ago, empty pantry, full fridge.
Like
so
that.
when I'm hungry, so I'm a great believer in eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. Having a regular amount of protein during the day, because as you heard me mention with Eric Westman, I've got a comeback line for Eric. Eric actually said, and I've got to email him. So he said, someone said, "Oh, this is based on animal models." My comeback line to Eric, which I forgot to give him on whenever it was the other day, I said, we're animals. We have the same metabolism. So the Krebs cycle goes across all of those. So I think we need to get a regular amount of protein to the body for our best health. Recognising in our ancestral diet that didn't exist, but nonetheless, for the last few thousand years, we've had the ability to get protein regularly because we've been able to process meat, able to have beef salamis, beef jerkies, we've been able to have cheeses, and they were ways we travelled in the past.
Yeah, pemmicans.
Yes, yeah. So it's been a method of sustaining our protein requirements when we weren't able to hunt something down. So when people say processed meats are bad for us, well, in fact, it's our survival's actually been dependent on it for several thousand years. Putting lots of chemicals into it probably isn't, but there are ways of doing that which is more traditional. And it may take a little bit of time to source that in your local community, but you go searching for it. We've got a great local community here which is actually producing animal, wildlife, wallaby, game meats. So I don't really want to try the possum stuff because I've tried, but nonetheless, it's there. It's all this stuff's available. It may just requires a bit of effort. Or as again, I used to say to my patients, you've got time. You can spend your time now sourcing your food, preparing your food, having that social activity around preparation of food and around the dinner table. And you can spend that time now, or you can spend that time in my waiting room down the track. That's it. This is the ultimate prevention. Put the right fuel in your car, you won't need to put it in for servicing as much. So if I get off on track, where were we going again? Drag me back.
Well, you were just rounding up on what you eat, what's low carb, and how
What
to
do I
approach
eat?
it.
So I have access in the refrigerator to a whole lot of stuff. So my go-to breakfast, everyone wants to know what I have for breakfast, which is a crazy thing. I'll find in the fridge a bit of last night's meat, animal-based product, and I will throw into that 1 or 2 eggs and some cheese, put that in a sandwich maker, put the lid down, turn the kettle on, and by the time I can make a cup of tea, because you can't talk to Belinda in the mornings unless she's got a cup of tea, but by the time that's made, I've got a hot breakfast.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah,
it's
it can
finger
be
food. And
easy.
it's so easy. It's like and now that, as it turns out, that omelette-sized ring, I've measured it because I'm a bit nerdy, has about 40 grams of protein in it.
Start.
That's a perfect, great start to the day with the amount of protein that I can metabolize for the next few hours. And then we eat, cook once, eat thrice. I'm a constant grazer. I like eating. I was a fat kid. I used to be 20 kilos heavier than I am now. But so I like eating. Belinda's much better at me, so she will, she'll be more rigid in that eating pattern. But I like eating. So when I go grazing, I feel like some protein. I feel like a piece of cheese, and it's there and it's readily available. And we do have some nuts. So I probably have. People say I don't have any nuts. So I go, okay, I do have some nuts, and we're not pure carnivores. When Belinda's away, I tend to be more carnivore. When she's here, she likes some vegetables. But I can remember years ago saying, she would often put 8 to 10 vegetables on a platter. Well, we might have a couple. But then we've got our family, our son-in-law's family are Midlands farmers. So we just, we get a regular supply of lamb chops. Thank you,
So handy.
Sue and John, for those. And so the other night, we cooked our chops out in the garden because there's so much fat coming off them. And then we just sat down opposite each other, hoeing into lamb chops with a bit of salt and pepper. That was our meal.
Yeah. Perfect meal.
And again, that fit. I've rewritten the dietary guidelines for the world. Again, that's the arrogance of the in one sentence. And James Mookie actually took them to the NH and MRC and said, no, they're too simple. I said, well, I'm happy to give them to you for $2 million. He's just spending millions and millions of dollars rewriting the dietary guidelines influenced by vested interests at this point in time. Why don't we just make it simple? And the simple thing is, and this is applicable to us as humans and all animals on the planet, and it goes very simply: eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on your culture and environment, avoiding added sugar and processed food. That's it. When you actually take that apart, the only food that fits that requirements, that's fresh, local, seasonal, so it's present all year round, is an animal-based product, unless you're storing it in some other form. I have described low-carb healthy fat there, and it's harder core form, ketogenic, harder form, carnivore diet. But that is an apolitical, sensible, ecologically stable, environmentally friendly, biochemically appropriate, evolutionary diet in one sentence. And I'm happy to accept criticism of it. The only criticism I've said is that maybe it should be ultra-processed food at the end rather than processed food.
Yeah,
But
that's an
if you think
interesting point.
about it, that's what we all, and that it's going to the shops and actually going around and staying away from, graze the periphery and leave the central bit out.
Yeah, that's a good shopping tip, and that's becomes your absolute norm, doesn't it?
Once you realise there's a whole psychology about how shopping centres are set up.
Yeah, like designed like a casino, keep you in, keep
It's
you
designed it so
confused.
in the southern hemisphere, they're all designed so you turn to the left, and in the US, you turn to the right when you get to the end of it. That safety is on that side of the road. It's all fascinating.
It is fascinating, but I think that's a really good key point that people can take away from this when they're trying to not trying to overcomplicate things, but things get overcomplicated. But that's a way of dialing everything back, keeping it really simple, and taking those steps for yourself. People coming to your information, and I really want to flag Belinda's information and research as well. Those people who want to know more about you both and your work and your research, where best to link to you?
Most of our stuff is on YouTube, and including podcasts that go out. If you search our names, you'll find us. Belinda's all fired up at the moment, and so I'm on Twitter. I'm just a bit naughty there, but that's Twitter X. Can't help myself. She's just started a Substack, which is really important because everyone's been encouraging her to write a book, but she's got. I know she's got a draft of the book, which is 1,000 pages at the moment. So what she's doing is she's putting together articles in the Substack. So for those people who really want to find out more about, again, why we've all gone down the wrong path and what's influencing us now, that's Belinda's work. The science is straightforward. Stop eating crap food. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Yep. Hard to do
that's it.
for some people, but the
Hard
science
to
is.
do. Look, we're completely driven by a society and a culture which drives us down this path of surrounding us with bright, shiny objects because we're just animals, and those bright, shining objects are packaged food and coloured foods, and that's what we're driven to. And the sugar will drive behaviour, and it's highly addictive. And they talk about bliss points of food. But if you want to work out why we're travelling that path, her work is just amazing. I'm not just sucking up to it because I'm married to it for a long time. It is just amazing. So, and she's called that truth zones. But if you look up Substack and Belinda Fettke, but truth zones, and that's what she's doing. She's just going down, and people can disagree with her, but everything's completely referenced. And people can, when all of our talks, whenever we get onto any of this controversial stuff, at the bottom you'll see a reference. It's completely referenced, publicly available material. So the conclusions that we've drawn are from piecing the jigsaw together as we see it. You may see it from a different light. That's okay. But this is what we're saying. We're not being defamatory. We're not being nasty. We're just saying, I'm sick and tired of amputating limbs, sick and tired of seeing all of the disease states that are walking around us in our community and affecting our livelihood and our children's and our grandchildren's future. And there's something we can do about it. which happens to be against most of the disinformation which I see has been promulgated by the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry upon us for 100 years. So therefore, we're coming back to the basics of eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole foods, supporting your local community, putting the right fuel in the cars. And if you're told otherwise, then there's clearly a vested interest that's saying that, or there's a vested interest that shaped that person's opinion. And I'm just very happy to discuss that, debate it without being a smartass. I haven't lost a debate in this space in 15 years. These are the facts. I'm happy to and that's what I meant was respectfully. You don't have to agree with me, but I'm really interested in how you got that opinion. And if your opinion happens to have come, like all of the vegan arguments, all of them, you can track back down to Seventh Day Adventist influence and corporate influence upon the whole pathways. But nothing against people who want to travel a vegan diet. I talk about that evolution of diet. If you're sick and unhealthy, a lot of people move to the food pyramid, which is what I did, and that didn't help. Can't outrun the food pyramid. And then I moved to low carb, healthy fat, and I moved to low carb, keto, and then carnivore, and up and down through that. Other people move towards being vegan, and they feel great because they've gotten rid of a whole lot of bad stuff in their diet. But over time, and all the ethical arguments or whatever, that is disinfo, because it's completely manipulated and surrounded, and there's a massive amount of corporate funding behind all that. And I can go through every single one of those and bring them back. But once you realize that a vegan diet is good for a little bit because you've got rid of the bad food diet, it is a nutritionally incomplete diet, and you will end up with nutritional deficiencies unless you are super elite and you're having lots of supplementation, or you want to eat a lot of oysters and snails and particularly oysters, because oysters don't have a sentience, apparently. So you can get things. So for a vegan has to accept the fact they've got to eat oysters all for the rest of their life to get close to it. But it's an elitist pathway to travel because you can't do it without supplementation. I'm sorry, again, so some of the people in this space who are lecturing, and I know of several, very senior people in this low carb keto space, they used to be vegans. They've just thought, well, hang on, I got sick, it hasn't worked for me. Why? They're intelligent people who actually got sick and decided to go back. They needed animal-based product back in their diet so their lives could improve. So I'm respectful of people who are traveling that vegan pathway for all sorts of reasons, but they've just gone down the wrong pathway. At some point in time, when you're driving down the highway, you will work out that most of the cars are coming in the other direction. It's just easier to turn around and come back. When it comes to health, mind you, I've been going against the highway of society for a long time.
Yes, yeah. Which direction
a few
are you
battle
going?
scratches. Yeah, a few battle scratches.
But yeah, I mean, it's food for thought because some people do disagree for those reasons. And I think, I think it's very interesting that people do feel better initially on a vegan diet, and then a lot of people switch over. But there's a lot of, I think, commonality between people who choose a plant-based diet and people who choose a low-carb diet. Often it's for health reasons, planetary reasons, environmental reasons, trying to do the right thing. But they're really interesting points. And back to your research and your point of view and how people can find your work, I would really encourage people to jump on that Substack and Belinda's work and your work.
If you're crazy enough to be a health professional, right, then come along and join the Australasian Metabolic Health Society. Here in Australia, we're trying to actually create a group of like-minded individuals who are there to support and educate each other. So the most important thing, or one of the most important things in my journey, was not knowing that I was right, but it was actually finding others who actually agreed with me.
Having your tribe, absolutely.
And then you go, oh, hang on, I'm not alone. In strength is numbers. And a lot of the time, we've had this conversation before and we'll have it again. It's hard work swimming against the tide. But to take a quote from a book that I wrote many years ago, and I'll leave you on this one, only dead fish swim with the current. You know you're really alive when you're swimming upstream. That's different from driving against the high traffic in the highway when you're a vegan, okay? But swimming against the current makes, you're like, to survive, you've got to be, it's good fun.
So do you want to be a dead fish or make big changes in your life? Thank you for not just the time you've taken today to chat with me, being so generous and open. I didn't know large parts of your story. You were talking about your background, your mum's story was fascinating. But all your questioning, keep questioning, keep researching and pushing, because you've made such a difference.
Thank you for having me, Claire.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. This really helps us to be able to create more content.